All right, folks, how you doing? Hope you're all doing well out there. So, welcome to Mars, Atlantis, and the Hollow Earth, part one with Ged Skeptic Media. Or non-alcoholic. I'm working tomorrow. Had a couple of cans earlier on, but when you're working the next day, you kind of have to watch your drinking. But I'll invite him on in a couple of minutes. Today, I was working on part 6 and part 8. Those were the two parts that needed to be completed. I've put up the part 4 on my channel so far. So very soon I'll put up the rest within the next few weeks or so. I've got up to part 8 on Mars, Atlantis, and the Hollow Earth, and I probably won't go beyond that. 8 parts seems more than sufficient, and very soon I'll be working on another presentation. I don't know which one to do though. I've got so many in my head. I've got presentations on the moon, on Mars, on Odin or Votan. That's definitely what I want to do with Ged. Absolutely, Odin's Thunder and the War on the West. That's the one I'm really looking forward to. That's going to be really, really eye-opening. And I really want to do it with him because he did Britain the Key to World History on his channel, and he did a spectacular job of it. So getting his perspective on that presentation is going to be absolutely invaluable. But it's almost like, how can I put it? It's like you kind of have to work up to it. You can't just like immediately just do it. You have to kind of build up to it. And it's kind of like, when you're wanting to watch like your favorite movie and it's going to be a special experience, it's almost like you're scared to watch it because it's going to be special, if that makes sense. It's like you're kind of like you want to watch all the dross surrounding it, and then you want to, that's really going to be the main thing. um, it's almost like it's going to be special when you do it, so you're kind of frightened to fuck it up, kind of thing, if that makes sense. But anyway, let's get Ged in on this. Let's see if he's around or not. So I'll email him the link. But yeah, Odin's Thunder and the War on the West, that is going to be something else when I get to that one. That's going to be the big one. That's going to be the big presentation. And I can see that going up to 20 parts long or more, because man, when you really put the light on that, when you put the floodlights on that, that just changes your perspective on everything. It really does. And it's like I say, it's going to be so instrumental and so important. I'm almost frightened of it. But it's certainly not something that I want to do on my own. I want to have Jed's perspective because it's going to be something else. So here we go. So I've sent him the link. We'll see when he responds. And when he does, we'll get right into it. But here we go. Mars, Atlantis, and the Hollow Earth, part 1. I've got to figure out all these controls because this is kind of my first time doing it. So we'll see how it goes. I know I'm repeating myself now. Just gotta wait. But shout out to all those who have subscribed to the channel and those who watch the videos and all that. Hope you're enjoying them. There's certainly going to be plenty of them coming out in the future. I'm only up to part 4 at the moment on this series. It goes up to 8 parts. My God, I've got so many things to cover. So many things rattling around, up here. Mars, the moon, Osiris, Votan, all these things. It's quite incredible, really.
Present. I was just watching some of your older stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Try and catch up with like, this whole thing.
Okay.
And are you got to show me anything that you've already shown, or?
Well, yeah, what I sent you before, Mars, Atlantis, the Hollow Earth. Just kind of like go through it and discuss it, if you don't mind that.
Right?
All right. Well, let's get right into it then. So here we go. Part one. Disclaimer, yada yada yada, allowances made for fair use, etc., and so forth. Always important to go through that so it doesn't get taken down. Sky people. Now, this guy, Brinsley Lapoire Trench, you want to talk about David Icke being kind of, a bit out there. Brinsley Trench's ideas are even more eccentric, arguably, I would say. But,
Where was he from? Is he a Frenchman?
No, he was a Dutch and Irish baron or earl or something like that. He was a member of the aristocracy.
Mm. Usually find it's
Pretty
them that come out with these esoteric sort of ideas.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's just having too much time on their hands. You could, I
It's,
guess,
it's,
you could.
it's never just it's never just John on his shed. You know what I mean? It's always some
No, it never is it? It's never just
some fancy
wee
pantsy guy.
Malcolm,
Aye,
wee
it's
Malcolm
never
from
just wee
Cumbernauld
Malcolm.
coming out with all this.
Aye.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. So let's see. So first of all, he comes up with this idea. Jehovah was originally a lord of Mars. Again, it's a whole white race Mars thing. He's also a god of battles. Mars and its lord are somehow deeply associated with strife and violence, affecting and afflicting humanity all the while. And especially if you read the Old Testament, it's pretty much nothing bloody but that. Jehovah then is a name adopted quite recently to designate the people from somewhere else. Interesting how he puts that kind of in the capitals almost in space, who deliberately created by means of their genetic science a race of human beings adapted to predetermined functions. So this idea right away that this specific race was adapted for the specific thing on this planet, it was never meant to go beyond that. That's a recurring theme right the way through Brinsley Trench's work when you go into it, especially the Sky people. Like, they were never meant to go beyond that. They were always meant to be in that place, in that designated role. And it's like it's been a cosmic fuck up ever since almost.
I know,
Thoughts
but
on that?
it kind of takes away from the whole idea that we were hunter gatherers before, and we were tilling the earth for the garden on Mars.
Yeah.
Like, what happened
I
to
don't
the
know.
hunter gatherers? Is that a different race of people? Or
Well, I don't know. Apparently, see, this is where part 4.5 really comes in. The kind of, I'm getting a bit further ahead here, but when I get to part 4.5 with what's his name, Lou Baldwin, with Mars and a Lost Planet Man, that this will really go into this whole thing with the Neanderthals. The Vikings were supposedly descended of the Martian blood, but that's way off in the future. So, but we'll get
but
to that eventually down the road.
it kind of implies that humans were put on this earth to, or we came from some kind of garden to till and look after this sort of Garden of Eden, whether it was on Earth or Mars or wherever it is. But it seems like we were never hunting, and we've got lots of evidence, archaeological evidence of spearheads and arrowheads and things like that, and that we were hunters. And there's even ancient cave paintings there on the hunt.
Yep.
So just to ignore all that and
Yep.
just say that we were all put here just to till the earth, I don't know. It's like we're already agricultural.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I often say about Edinburgh Castle. They did an excavation up there a few years ago, and they found remains from the Bronze Age. They found old farming tools and spearheads from 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, way up on Castle
Mm-hmm.
Rock in Edinburgh.
Yep.
So it's kind of hard to ignore. So let's head right back into it. Desert Gardens. So in addition to adopting human life forms to their own ideas, they probably also made special adaptations of plant and animal forms. And this immediately made me think of the X-Files movie for some reason. I don't know why. They achieved all this in an artificial environment prepared in what was, at the beginning of their project, a desert area. The exact location has puzzled the students for years, for centuries now. By means of irrigation, they turned this land into a veritable garden. Any thoughts on that?
I was still thinking about the last slide there, but so Earth was like a barren desert, and we were put here to turn it into some garden. Is that what it's saying?
I'm, I'm guessing that's what he's kind of hinting at here. Yeah, it's kind of like an artificial environment. But no, he's actually talking. No, he's not talking about Earth here. He's talking actually about Mars. That there was actually a garden on Mars, and the exact location has not been discovered because we're looking in the wrong place. Well, if you're looking on the wrong planet, then obviously not going to find it. But that seems to be where Brinsley Lepar Trench was headed in with that assertion that it was some kind of a garden environment. And when we get into later presentations, it talks about what Mars used to be before the Venusian cataclysm. And it used to be like an Earth-like planet. It was very Earth-like, actually, before the loss of one or two of its moons, and that kind of wiped it all out. And it was a big cosmic disaster, which massively fucked up the planet Earth as well, but really fucked up Mars. I mean, just decimated the whole planet and just turned it into this desert environment. And even large parts of our planet were turned into a desert. Like the Sahara, for example, used to be very green and very, very fertile. Used to have lakes right in the middle of it. And this used to be like this big, massive, the Sahara desert used to be this massive, like, tropical paradise almost, and yet this one cataclysm just fucked up half the planet in like one shot. It messed up the whole of Mars and half of Earth, and I think Mars got it worse because it was closer. That seems to be the general outline and the general theme. But this is all explained, like I say, in future
Well, if
presentations.
you look at why there's deserts now, you'll find there's a pattern if you look around the Earth with deserts, and they're usually on the equatorial line, and they're usually in
Yep.
the middle, going around.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to remember that, and they're usually the warmest parts of the Earth, because you're kind of on the bulge. Well, I know it's a ball, but the way it's tilted, the way it's facing the Earth, you're kind of closer to the sun on the equator than the north or the south.
Yeah, the whole.
So
Yeah,
I like
I was
the.
going to
Do you
say
know
the whole.
what? Have you seen
Go ahead.
Prometheus? The movie Prometheus.
Years ago, I don't think I've actually seen it all right the way through from start to finish, but I have seen parts of it. Yeah.
Mate, like if you want to nail that idea that maybe life on Earth was started from like an alien thing, like Prometheus is the one, man. It's really good. It gets you thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole Anunnaki creation idea and all this. And I've thought for years that Ridley Scott was an insider because when you watch some of his movies, like Kingdom of Heaven, for example, is like pure propaganda from start to finish. You're like, Ridley, do your fucking research, mate. That's not what happened. But anyway, but when you're watching movies and you realize that they're kind of put through that filter, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So they're kind of putting the message out through the movies kind of thing.
Yep.
Um,
But
but
Prometheus
anyway,
is they've got these guys called the engineers. They're like big white guys, and big
yeah,
pure white black guys, and they land on Earth, and Earth's like it's got like water and it's got like vegetation, but there's no life at all on the planet. And one of the engineers he drinks his black like oil, and he falls into a waterfall, and he sort of breaks apart, and you see all in the water all his DNA sort of like dissolving, but then coming together as like new DNA, and it's like the beginnings of life on Earth was this engineer like sacrificing himself to this lake, this
yeah.
waterfall, and it kind of gets to the kind that they were the ones that created us, and the engineers were like
Mm-hmm.
the ones that created humans. So it kind of goes along the same lines as this idea that humans are from an alien life, but is Prometheus kind of saying that all life came from somewhere else, kind of, and that's almost like a scientific. What's it called? Is it called Pan's Bertha, or what's it called?
I'm not sure.
Where
Uh,
a meteor is meant to have brought all life to Earth, kind of like Earth was just nothing, and then a meteor hit it, brought some kind of bacteria, and then life started. And
yeah,
so,
that's hinted at. Sorry, that's hinted at in one of the Star Trek Voyager episodes where they're on a time ship and outside of space time, and Chakotay comes up with the idea of eliminating a comet, and yet if you eliminate the comet, it would have wiped out 8,000 species like that.
mhm.
So these things are all kind of hidden in plain sight, kind of thing. But I know what you mean. Like the engineers, I think that's the name in Prometheus. They're all albino. They're not white. They're albino
Mm.
white, and notice they have black eyes. You ever heard of the
Mm-hmm.
phenomenon called the black-eyed children?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. These are
Yeah.
fucking scary things. So they show up at your door and they stare at you and they ask to be allowed in and they like drain the life out of a room. It's fuck, I hope I never encounter one of them in my life. God only knows. But well, that would be a fucking scary day. Let's head back to Eden on Mars here. This whole idea. So it was an enormous agricultural project in this garden area. They placed the new animal human type. Specifically, we are told in the Genesis story to till the ground, care for the vegetation, and to guard the area. The Garden of Eden on Mars, there was a time when total concealment of such a wild idea was absolutely necessary. This whole idea of the garden being on Mars. Like I say, David Icke doesn't even agree with this theory, and this will come up in the later parts. We get to parts 5, 6, and 7, and all this. We get into his stuff with the biggest secret and Children of the Matrix. But the idea that the Garden of Eden was not even on this planet; it was somewhere else. I know you find it laughable, of course, because you're laughing. But maybe there is something to it, or maybe not. Okay.
Well, I just say to the guy, where's the evidence for this? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But
Is
then
there
why would it
old
need to be?
agricultural terracing on Mars? Has that been spotted? Is there tools being found on Mars by the little rover, like tilling tools? And is there where's the evidence that there's an Eden on Mars? Like this, and it's just saying stuff, and we've just to believe it.
Well, there's a couple of things I would say about this, and you know, you're going to have a point with what you come back with on this. I can tell straight away. But the first of all explanation is possibly that none of the Mars rovers ever actually went to Mars. They were they never left the planet to begin with. They're all here, and they're actually just filming on Earth, and no images from Mars were ever allowed back in the first place. There is that, which sounds like an excuse, I admit, but there is that. The second thing is that there's the canals on Mars, the Martian canals. And this is talked about by like H.G. Wells when he talks about War of the Worlds, the whole idea that there were canals throughout the planet. I've even got a book somewhere around about here called The Canals on Mars that talks about all this. But well, the whole argument with Brinsley Lepar Trench is that the garden was fed by canals, artificial waterways coming from the poles, particularly the North Pole, and that's what would feed the irrigation systems on the planet potentially. But in terms of there being solid
I've
evidence,
got
well,
I've already got my own thoughts about that canal stuff. That's coming up in the next slides, I know, because I've already watched all this stuff. So I've already got my. I'm not going to spoil it yet. I'm not going to spoil it yet, but
it's okay.
I've already like thought about this canal idea. So right, aye, right.
He's
I
just
just
waiting
I
to
just say
swing.
no. I just say
Yeah.
where the hell is the evidence? Like we know that meteors hit the Earth and stuff like that. We've seen them come, we've seen them going past in the sky, and we know that. And we know that there's stuff on meteors, sometimes certain minerals, and so in my mind, it's not totally out there to think that some kind of something could have came into the atmosphere and began. Well, that's what they say. How the dinosaurs got wiped out, kind of a meteor coming in. So there's the beginnings of fucking humans there, because if the dinosaurs never got wiped out by this meteor that came in, apparently humans wouldn't be around today. So there you go. There's already like a meteor, and that's mainstream science, man. That's what mainstream science is kind of telling us.
Yeah.
So
Let me ask you, what do you think of
whether you believe it or not, a meteor was involved at some degree.
mhm. Just before we go any further, what's your opinion of Arthur's Seat? Do you think that's a volcano, or do you think that's actually a meteorite? Because I think it's the latter. I don't think that's a volcano at all. It
Well,
doesn't make sense. It
it's
doesn't look like a
stone.
damn volcano.
Now they've done lots of archaeological stuff and geological like stuff on Alpha C. Alpha C is actually really important in science and
Mhm.
geological science, like mineral science and stuff like that. And the basalt, I think it's like volcanic basalt. So it's a plug. It's a volcanic plug, and the rest of the stone around it's been worn away over time. But
Yeah.
a mate, if that was a meteorite, Arthur C, you could take a chunk of that and sell it for thousand. If you can if you find a meteorite in your garden, mate, you could sell that for like £20,000 if it's a big one. I mean, so if Arthur C was a meteorite,
Mm.
mate, I'd be up there smacking chunks off and selling them. Uh,
Good point. Yeah. I mean,
like
it's meant to be
I'm,
like like, dynamic earth is good for the kids kind of thing, because that's what mainly the target audience. It's mainly aimed at, like, when you go there in the summer months, June to September, it's absolutely packed full of families and kids and all this, learning about geology and history of the planet. I'm just thinking, are they wasting their time? Is this really the truth? But who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of alternative theories and all this sort of thing. But I'm just thinking, when you go into
well,
dynamic earth,
when
it's
I've
like,
looked
just
at
remember it's.
when I've looked at the stone
Sorry,
up
go
there,
ahead.
mate, it looks like pumice. Kind of when it's got the bubbles, kind of you can see that there's been high heat involved in the creation of the rock on Arthur C. It's not like sandstone or limestone or anything like that. This stuff is solid, and it's funny the bits where people have been walking up, it's almost been polished to a shine in
Mm,
the volcanic stone, and it's unusual. And you can tell it's. Well, I don't think it's a meteorite. Do you know what? See Loch Leven up Perth.
yeah, I've never
That
been there.
whole lake, that whole loch, they've drained it. That was huge before. That was like, and that was another 50% bigger or something. It was a massive lake. That it still is huge, even though they've drained it. But I'm sure they reckon that was created by a meteorite impact. That whole area.
Do you know how many lochs there are in Scotland?
Oh, there's
It's
thousands, thousands.
30, over 30,000. There's over
Ah,
30,000 lochs in Scotland.
mm.
When you get into the whole Hollow Earth thing, this becomes fucking scary.
But oh,
But
no
let's.
locks are the same. No locks. Some lakes
No.
are locks are huge, kind of long. Some locks are wide. Some locks are small. Some locks are really deep. Some locks are really shallow. And it's like they're not
Yeah.
all the same. They've not all been created the same. I don't think locks.
Yeah, but the whole thing with dynamic Earth is, I often wonder if it's just propaganda. Basically, it's just indoctrination for the younger generations to believe in the current theories of geology. I'm thinking this all might be bullshit, but you never know. I mean, the thing about science is it's ever evolving. The thing about science is, I always like to say, science is not an exact science. It's always being revised. And when you go into dynamic Earth, it's a great attraction. I was in there like 3 or 4 years ago, but it's like, is this all just bullshit? Because I suspect somewhere along the line, a lot of this is wrong, and it's going to have to be revised. But anyway, let's get back to this presentation. So the idea of the four rivers, if Mars symbolizes primitive or initial generative powers for the purpose of human procreation, as Madame Blavatsky says, if Adam, Jehovah, Brahma, and Mars are identical, as she states, an objective interpretation demands a very close connection with the Garden of Eden. How does Genesis describe the four rivers that flowed from Eden? The Smith's Goodspeed version reads, there was a river flowing of Eden divided into four branches. So again, this is pushing the whole idea that it's an artificial garden created on a planet with artificial canals all intersecting, almost like the Maltese cross. This sort of thing. You have to wonder where the symbolism really ties into all this. The whole idea of, like, yes, societies like the Templars or the Hospitallers, the Maltese cross, the connection with royalty and all this. The whole idea that they had almost like they adapt this symbol of the cross like this, because that is the symbol of their lineage, which goes back to Mars. I'm guessing that's what it's supposed to symbolize, but I don't really know because I'm just kind of guessing. But what do you think?
Well, for starters, Madame Blavatsky, she's like the queenie of New Age esoteric nonsense. I mean, she's very satanic, and I don't like her stuff, man. I don't like her teachings. But anyway, apart from that, the whole cross thing with the canals, it says it branches, it forks. It says it forks, so it was one river and it forks into four. It's not a cross; it
Yeah.
forks into four, which means
Okay.
it begins as one river and then splits into four, like that, like a fork. It's not a cross. And rivers, and
Oh,
like it says in the statement, I think it says in the next slide that rivers don't work like that. We know rivers don't work like that. That's why you can't have a cross. That's why it's four. That's why it's forked four. It's not. It's not a cross. It's fork. It's a fork. It's like one, and then it splits into four.
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's why I want to do these presentations with you and go
If
through
you
them
read
because
that
you're giving
again,
me
if
things
you
to
read it
think about.
over
Yeah.
again, it says it forks into four. Maybe it's the
Mhm.
next slide
Okay,
that talks about
let's head
the.
into it then. Go ahead. Sorry, what were
Nah,
you going to say?
on to the next slide, mate.
Okay, so canals. So, but the King James Version reads, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became four heads." The latter version appears to be correct. Head is the correctly used word according to the Hebrew original. The description of heads being prime source. This means that four prime sources flowed in four directions. Okay, I see what you mean. Nature demonstrates that rivers don't flow this way, but canals do. And I picked that image on purpose. The idea of the four rivers intersecting in Rome. Have you ever been to Rome?
No, I've never been to Rome. No.
I've been a couple of times. Well, you do have the river of the four, the fountain, excuse me, of the four rivers there, and all this sort of thing. And I'm thinking, if there was ever a Martian civilization on Earth, it was definitely the Romans. That's kind of where I was going with the whole Kali Yuga idea of putting in the picture from Gladiator of Maximus with the Earth and all this. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about Ridley Scott, being possibly like an insider. That's what I tend to think, because the whole Martian Empire was kind of like, well, every empire really is a Martian empire, but particularly the Romans, because they seem to have adopted the colors, the red and the black and the white. The red, black, and white is the Martian colors. Reminds me of another empire that existed in the 20th century, which Hollywood seems to be absolutely obsessed with. But the whole idea that the Martian influence is still kind of with us even after all this time. I mean, like I say, every empire is a Martian empire, because the whole idea of an empire in the first place is Martian in origin. Mars is the planet of war and strife and violence and blood.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead.
Yep. Ah, like you
Uh,
said, sure the Romans marching into some strange North African place, they would look like Martians, and with their helmets and shiny armor and shit like that. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. Well, where do they assemble? When you watch Rome, the TV show, they're assembling on the field of Mars. I mean, talk about probably fucking obvious. But so we'll head on to the next one here. The Kali Yuga, like I was saying, the host of Jehovah is intimately connected with the Age of Iron, or the Kali Yuga, and that the Lord Jehovah is the administrator for the planet Earth of that age. This specialized secondary type of humanity created by the Jehovah was made of the dust. And again, you have the symbolism, of General Maximus. Interesting, isn't it? When the name Maximus, like the maximum man, the height of man. Well, yeah, certain type, the Martian man. General Maximus, the maximum, the top. He's the leader of the armies and all this. By the way, commanders of the army of the North and all this sort of thing. So of the Earth itself, this was something new and different. Did not happen until ages after the first type of mankind, excuse me, was well established. So again, going back to this whole idea of like propaganda and movies and all this sort of thing, the maximum man who leads the armies, the alpha male, and all this bullshit. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I didn't really catch. What did this last slide mean? What was it saying? I didn't really catch any of that, man. What was that all about?
That you didn't? Okay, so it's called the Kali Yuga. This is from
Right,
Hindu
right,
teachings, I believe, from Hinduism.
right.
The
So
Kali
for
Yuga means
Hinduism,
the age of iron. Yeah.
Kali Yuga, that Lord
Well,
Jehovah is the administrator.
mhm.
What does that fucking mean? So Kali Yuga,
The one who rules over an area, administrator, somebody who like runs a certain area or administers to an area, or something like the ruler. So the whole idea, I mean, when you read the Old Testament, see, let me just say, I think it's important to go to Eastern sources like Hindu or Buddhist sources. But do you know why? Because they're not corrupted. Because they've not been tampered with by, well, ironically enough, Rome or the Vatican. So when you go to these Eastern sources, you're getting the undiluted version of things which have not been propagandized and tampered with. So that's why I'm quite often willing to go to the Hindu and Eastern Buddhist sources. Because they're saying largely the same things. That's the funny thing. They're saying the same, but they're not diluted. They're not spun in any
But
way. They're
what's the
just
point of the last? What is the point of the last slide? That the Kali Yuga was the minister for the who like
what's the point of it?
what's the point of the minister of the planet Earth of that age? This specialized
Well,
secondary type of humanity. So it's a secondary type of humanity
yeah,
created by Jehovah. So is that
yeah.
us? Are we the secondary type of humanity?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying to you when I was on your channel before, is that there's the Atom 1 type, there's the Atom 2 type, and there's a Crossman. So there's really three types. So, oh, hang on, sorry, pressed the wrong button there. But the Atom 2 type was like the Martians, the race of Mars, which was ruled over by Jehovah. So Jehovah takes over the planet with his race, which is us, and becomes the world of empire, essentially, of like the Roman Empire or any other empire which comes out of Europe. So we've taken over through conquest. I think that's essentially what he was saying, is that it is the Jehovah Empire. But when you go into the Old Testament, the world of Jehovah is a world of a lot of violence and war. When you read the Old Testament, it's nothing pretty much but that bloodshed and warfare and conquest. And when Jehovah took over the planet and put his people in, which is basically us, it became an age of iron and an age of bloodshed, and that needs to end because we need to come into the age of the Crossman, which is the combination of the mixed races, Adam 1 and Adam 2 coming in together to converge to end this violence. Does that make sense? Or am I talking rubbish? Remember,
No,
you can be completely honest.
let's move to the next slide, mate.
Okay, fair enough. So the Garden of Eden, there is no Garden of Eden in the first creation story. Earth Animal was not created in the Garden of Eden either. He was created elsewhere and placed in the garden. And after his expulsion, he was taken back to the place whence he was taken, according to Genesis 3:23. Those human entities, even who accepted the Earth Animal body's place in Eden's garden, rejected some of the consciousness of life that is proper to mankind and started themselves on the downward spiral of degeneracy even, which finally resulted in the deluge. Any thoughts on that? That this was just kind of like we were given this
That's just ripped out the Bible, though. That's
this
just like ripped out. That's the whole idea that Adam and Eve they ate from the tree of knowledge, they got kicked out, blah blah blah. That's just at the Bible. It's nothing new. It's and then like that's all humans are now sins. And it's like fair enough. I don't know about the deluge after that, but like the whole idea that humans can fucked up and then we got kicked out and it's nothing new. It's torn straight out of the Bible.
But what do you think of this whole idea of what's referred to there as degeneracy? Do you think that kind of pertains to the West today, as we see it today? The idea
Well,
that, and also like the ramping up of
it
natural
would have
disasters in the world, and we seem to
been
be.
a different. It would have been totally different morals, different standards, different. Even back then, like they wouldn't have had things like porn and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So there's like different. Fair enough, they would have been doing, but I mean, viewing it like the way people watch it on their phones, people can like, you could say it's like widespread, worldwide degeneracy nowadays. And maybe in Rome they were doing it, and maybe in some little fucking civilizations they were doing weird stuff. But um, the way it is nowadays with porn and stuff like that, the way how accessible it is, you get for free practically, and it's again like today's degeneracy is different from the ancient degeneracy. You know what I mean? There was different standards as well. Kind of like age consent and stuff like that in different countries. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it depends. Like, what was the degeneracy back in the days? Were they more moral back in the days, or are we more moral now? You know what I mean? It's hard to judge what they mean by the whole degeneracy. Like having too much to drink. God, that's people do that every weekend nowadays. Like back in ancient times, maybe having a drink every weekend was like degeneracy. But this is just the norm now. You know what I mean? Like
Trust me, I
sitting
did that last
smoking
night.
and well, that's what I'm saying. Like, what is degeneracy? You know what I mean? Like we're already
Yeah.
in degeneracy now, and we probably have been for a
Yeah.
while.
This makes you
So
wonder, though. Sorry, just makes you wonder with like the weather being all fucked up and extreme the way it has been the last 10, 15 years. Does this tie into what it's saying in the Bible? Like, if you refuse my commandments, I'm going to basically fuck you all up. Basically, is what God or Jehovah seems to be saying in the Old Testament: is obey my laws, obey my commands, or I'll come along and trash the place.
mm.
Jehovah throwing a goddamn hissy fit. Like, no, you're not obeying my laws, so I'm just going to fucking wreak havoc. Makes you wonder, though, because that does seem to be what's happening to a large extent, I suppose. But let's move on to the next thing. The Great Experiment. So the Great Experiment failed. The garden was shut down, and its people were. I love how Brinsley almost makes it sound like a science experiment. I think that's actually what he was going for.
It sounds like Disneyland. The Disneyland shut down. They closed down the roller coasters. They took away the candy floss stands and they kicked them out in the cold.
Yeah. You've been on you've peed in the seats in Space Mountain too many times. Fuck off. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So, as people were turned out to fend for themselves, which was not at all easy for them after their comfortable life in a prepared environment. So, in the garden, they had been completely protected from all predatory and annoying forms of animal life. Forgive me if I'm
Annoying.
wrong, Jed, but isn't all animal
Annoying
life annoying?
forms.
A dog barking too much is annoying. A cat that
Aye.
scratches you is annoying. Pretty much all animal life is annoying up to a point. But I love the way they phrase that. All predatory and annoying animals. Okay, there's some animals that are apparently not annoying. That's revelation to me, I'll tell you. So Jehovah's decree. Okay, so by contrast, they found the earth a most hospitable place. They multiplied, and with them multiplied the problems that pose for their creators, the Jehovah. The descendants attempted to follow an agricultural way of life based on the original experiences of their kind of the garden, which came to be looked upon as paradise. It was God, not Jehovah, but the Elohim, who stepped in and commanded Noah to make the ark. So, what is the difference in the actual fact between the Elohim and the Jehovah? Because aren't they like the same thing, as far as I was concerned?
I don't know,
They're
mate.
gods. I think it's when you go into the Tolkien universe, it's like the difference between the Gandalf and Sauron. Basically, they're both types of the same thing. The Maiar, if you follow the whole Tolkien mythology, like some of them are on the good side, like Mithrandir or Gandalf, and some of them are on the evil side, like Sauron. But they're the same thing essentially. The Maiar, they're divine beings, they're gods. So that seems to be like the Elohim created like one type, and Jehovah created another type, and they're in conflict. Which just kind of seems to be where all that's going. But let's see, what does it say? God who stepped in and commanded them to make the ark. So the experiment has fucked up. It's failed. He's trying to get everyone out of there. So we're all going to go to Earth now. And this is going to, again, come up when we get to the 4.5 when it comes to Mars and a
Did
lost
you read
planet
that
man. This
slide?
fills in the blanks.
Did you read
Yeah.
that
Did you
slide?
hear it? Yeah.
Put up for a second. I feel
Sorry.
like I've
Okay.
missed something there.
Maybe the signal's. Sorry. Go ahead.
Because the descendants attempted to follow an agricultural. Aye, right. This is leading to the spaceship.
Yeah.
The Ark is
And
a
it's funny when you.
spaceship.
Do you know what this actually reminds me of all things? This reminds me of Red Dwarf, which incidentally made by the BBC. But do you remember in the early seasons of Red Dwarf in series one, where they talk about the cat people? Do you remember that?
Because
With
what was his
Lister.
name? Cat. Cat. Oh, was it
Aye,
Lister?
well,
I thought, aye.
Well,
He's a
Lister
cat
turned
man, is
out
he
to
not?
Lister turned out to be the god of the cat people, and they made they make fun of it, they make light of it, but the actual undertones are fairly consequential. Where like there was one half of the cat race that made a ship that followed his laundry and crashed into an asteroid or something like that, and the other half stayed on the ship. But even though they present it in a light-hearted way, when you're looking at all this stuff that's made by the BBC and all this, if you actually read the undertones, the undercurrents, it's actually telling you the total story. That's the thing. What this is how entertainment is so insidious because they're actually telling you the truth, but they're telling you in such a way that you don't take it seriously because you think it's entertainment. But and Lister himself is an example of what's called a cross man because he's half Irish and half uh, Guanan, I think it is, one of these countries in Africa. There's 54 nations in Africa. I can't remember which one. But, he's an example of what you call a cross man. He's mixed race. So even when you watch, shows like Red Dwarf, they're actually presenting the truth in entertainment form. But when you know how to kind of flip the switch and turn on the decoder, it's telling you everything that you need to know. Sorry, I'm yabbering on and blabbing here. Any thoughts?
No, no thoughts.
No.
Blank,
Oh,
blank.
right.
Tumbleweed.
Okay. Well, let's. Oh, all right. Let's head on to the next one. In Noah's Ark, when the last remnant of Atlantis went down to destruction. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. You hear this?
Yep.
Okay. All right. The Noah story was moved to cover the consequences. The Ark, in spite of its description, uh, handed down to us by a people of later generations, was a spaceship. The original story of Noah and his ark is that of Jehovah saving the portion of his humanity he brought to earth with him after his temporary expulsion from his place in heaven, Mars. The only part there I would say is what part was temporary because we still haven't been back to Mars, so I would say that was a permanent expulsion. But as far as I'm aware, we don't have any presence up there now. But again, the whole idea that Noah's Ark being a spaceship that took off from Mars, bringing his people, the chosen people, right, to Earth. That's going to be, the presentation I'm thinking of working on after this one is Odin. I've even got the title in mind Odin's Thunder and the War on the West. And that one's really going to blow the top off of a lot of preconceived notions.
This shit.
And
This shit makes the Bible version sound real.
yeah, okay.
like
Well,
I would tend to believe the Bible version where you got all the animals two by two on his on the ark more than this fucking spaceship.
yeah. The whole idea that they were all put in a spaceship from Mars, they all came here, just sounds ridiculous.
I'm more liable to believe Ark built a fucking wooden boat.
Uh, Well, they say that they've actually found it in Turkey, Mount Ararat, I think it's called, which is in the middle of Asia Minor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they say that they've actually found Noah's Ark these days.
It's like taking a fantastical story and putting bells and
Yeah.
whistles in it and just making it more fucking like fantastical.
Hmm. Do you think this guy just had too much time on his hands and went off, bit off his head or something like
It's didn't get me wrong, it's entertaining, but
that?
scientific. It's not even it's not even pseudo scientific. It's almost like just fucking fantasy. And it's like what's his name? L. Ron Hubbard and
Hmm.
these science fiction writers. There was a lot of
Well,
them back
you
then.
might have a point. Well, yeah, there was. Definitely was. So Mars's North Pole, for in truth, the flood of the first Noah took place on Mars, according to Brinsley Trench. The garden was located in the northern hemisphere, not far from the polar regions, which was I was saying that before. Seen from space, the Earth has a rainbow halo around it. So I have to wonder the whole idea of the promise of the rainbow is like this is your planet now kind of thing. Furthermore, the rainbow is a phenomenon never observed in Mars, and its appearance in the skies of Earth left a permanent impression in the hearts of the Jehovah's people as they approached the adopted planet in their spaceship. But I chose the image, the top image there on purpose, where you see kind of like the ice around the circle at the top. The whole idea of hollow Hollow Earth, Hollow Planets. I've actually got a book. I managed to get it for 60 quid. They were asking for 400 quid for it once, about all the planets being hollow. What's your opinion of the Hollow Earth theory?
Well, I can go as far to say that we have massive cave systems that could
Yep.
people can, if there was kind of some disaster above ground, maybe there was a civilization that lived underground for a while. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's as far as I go with the Hollow Earth. Like, what do they make in? I don't know exactly what they mean by Hollow Earth. Like, is there not a core? Is and what? How far down? Because we can really only dig 12 miles down into the earth before shit. I think it's 12 kilometers. Sorry, so it's not even 12
Yeah.
miles. It's like 12 kilometers. We can only dig 12 kilometers into the earth. So what do they mean by hollow earth? Is it further than those
Mm.
12 kilometers? Is it because the pressures
Well,
and everything and the heat and
sure. Well, well, I'm kind of spoiling future episodes when I say this, but there is a theory that there's like a space is about 1,400 miles right at the top. I think it's on the north, and there's like 1,200 miles on the other pole, I believe. I'm going off memory there, and it's like gravity switches when you go inside the planet. So it's like there's one rule on the outside, and then it flips around when you go on the inside. So it's like an inverse, and that is how they keep everything on the planet and everything in the planet from just floating out into space. It's really weird, but it is gotten into in future presentations, the whole thing with all that, and I do kind of, well, I'd say I don't explain it, but like, it is explained with the future presentations. When you get past like 3 or 4, you start to get into Hollow Earth a lot more. 4, 5, 6, they start getting right into all this, but that's in the future. But the whole idea, that's the north. The whole idea of being in, I don't know. There's always this thing with the north, like the sacred north. The north is the way. The north is the holy land, or the north is the route to paradise. Well, when we say something goes wrong, what do we say? We say it went south, right? If something goes wrong, it went south. That's an expression. You have to wonder why. So even when
well,
you
90,
get into
90%
colloquialisms,
90% of the Earth's population lives in the northern hemisphere.
yeah, that's a
Well,
good point.
80%, something like that. Okay, it's like most of us live in the north, so most of us see the northern sky.
Mhm. Well, you know, even just like looking at these words, this etymology, where it actually originates from, it's pretty interesting, really. And you'd have to wonder why it resonates. But the second little picture that I put in the presentation there was from Man of Steel when Krypton gets destroyed, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
rather again going into the whole idea that movies are presenting the truth but in encrypted form. No pun intended there when I'm talking about Krypton. But the whole idea of the Superman from this other planet that looks like Mars almost. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So Atlantean Age. When the Jehovah arrived on Earth, that's when the Atlantean Age began, according to him. I'm not quite sure I totally agree with that, though. I think actually Atlantis and Mars, I'm not sure how much they're actually interconnected. I think they are somewhat, but not as much as Brinsley Lepore Trench thinks they are. I think they're actually fairly disconnected. But anyway, as Ignatius Donnelly wrote in his very interesting work, the fact that the story of Atlantis was for thousands of years regarded as a fable proves nothing. So just because it was regarded as a fairy story doesn't mean it actually was a fairy story. In fact, when you actually study what the word fairy means, it's not pleasant. When you talk about Irish and Icelandic myths and legends and all this, the fairies were very malevolent beings, actually. They were not anything that you wanted to have anything to fucking well do with. And in Iceland, they actually built the roads miles around the rocks rather than go through them. They built around them.
Yep, and the Irish fairies were like shapeshifters and would come and take your kids and stuff like that.
Yeah. Leprechaun.
Creepy.
They put iron over the bars of the windows to stop these monsters from getting in and stealing their babies in the middle of the night. Things like that. These people, they took it very fucking seriously. They took it very seriously.
Or there was
That's the
another.
thing.
I think there was another fairy, or it might be a different creature altogether. But it would mimic the baby. Like it would take a baby away, and this thing would replace the baby, but it'd be like shapeshifted. Can it look like the baby? It was really like
Oh,
a demon or something.
yeah, he's vicious little. You go into the war with the Tuatha De Danann and the Formori in Ireland. The whole and now it goes back to Greek myths as well. The Titans versus the gods and the Olympians and all this sort of thing. Versus I maybe got that the wrong way around, but yeah, you get the general gist. So let's move on to the next one. Plato's dialogues. In Plato's dialogues, he describes how his ancestor Solon visited Egypt. There he was given by the wise men, priest of Sais, a lengthy history and description of Atlantis, including an account of its final destruction. The first king of Atlantis is said to have been Poseidon, one of the Greek Olympian gods. We have already seen how the Olympian gods equate with the Jehovah. So this whole idea of this, oh, hang on, sorry, wrong button. This pantheon, these entities, the Jehovah and the Elohim, these, there's no doubt to my mind that they either existed or still do exist. These watchers or these so-called superior beings, these solar gods and all this sort of thing. Get into that when we get to 4.5. That kind of touches upon that. There's a lot of things actually created. Like 4.5 is like a bridge between the first 4 and then the latter 4, and so much will be explained when we get to that point. But what do you think of this idea of Elohim and Jehovah and all this sort of thing? These Olympian deities, these gods. Do you think they ever existed, or do you think they still do?
If they did, they wouldn't be called Jehovah.
Fair point. But I looked it up, by the way. Solon, he was the maternal grandfather of Plato. He was his grandfather, I think, on his mother's side, or his great grandfather. Grandmother's did I just say? Sorry, grandfather. I beg your pardon. It was his grandfather on his mother's side. But yeah, the whole dialogues of Plato coming out talking about Atlantis. What do you think of all that? Do you think he had any basis for truth, or it was just passed on an old family story?
It could have been Doggerland, man. I think this whole idea about Atlantis is possibly Doggerland. And during those times where there was a great flood, when that Scandinavian ice shelf collapsed into the sea and all the waters rose, I think maybe Britain and Ireland were connected, and they were connected to mainland Europe. And there was probably an area that they classed as Atlantis, probably because it was next to Atlantic Sea. Yeah, it's right next to the Atlantic.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the clue, as always, is right in the name. And yeah, Doggerland is a fascinating subject. It really is. There's no doubt to my mind that one time you could walk all the way from Norway to Scotland without
Yep,
getting your feet
yep.
wet, and
You
you
can
can walk
see
all
it
the
in
way across to Ireland.
one of your later slides about this. I think it's like 4 in the 4s, but you can see Europe, and you can see how shallow the waters is kind of around Britain. You can see where it all connected before the flood. That's the thing. You can see it.
Yeah. No, it's all right there. The thing is, Britain as we know it today, in 500 years, I don't think it's going to exist because you're getting flooding all the time. It's happening
And
all.
there
There
was,
was there was a village. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say they've been pulling stuff up. Fishermen pull stuff up all the time out of Dogger. Well, the channel, the waters between Britain and France. They're pulling up archaeological stuff all the time. They're pulling up rhinoceros horns and shit, man. Like they reckon there was villages and that. So we know people were around. People were around when this massive flood happened in Doggerland. So those stories are probably going to. Yeah, that was a massive incident for human history, and it's probably been fed down in these stories, like the Noah stories and these flood stories, because it was obviously affected the whole world. Okay, it wouldn't have just been we would have got hit the worst because we're the closest to the Scandinavian countries, Britain, but it would have rose the water in other places as well. Again, it would have been a worldwide thing, definitely.
Well, the later presentations are from this one. They go all into this in great detail. Believe me, that will be further to come. I've got all the information about that way down the
And
line when we get to like 4, 5, 6.
Doggerland's
So,
based
go ahead.
in a lot of fact. Ken, there's a lot of evidence to show that
Yeah.
Ken, Britain was joined to France. There's a lot of evidence to show people were living there. So, and that's what I like. Ken, I didn't like this shit. Ken, this stuff that there's no evidence for. I like to follow the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So, well, I've got the next one then. The Garden of Hesperides. Plato wrote that the Atlanteans built with white, red, and black stone. This is the Martian colours. Plato also stated, according to Donnelly, that the plain of Atlantis had been cultivated during many ages by many generations of kings. The Atlantean culture on Earth was a beautiful place. The Garden of Hesperides, the Isles of the Blessed, the Elysian Fields. Have you ever read the works of Ignatius Donnelly? They're really interesting. Really interesting,
No.
especially when he talks about Atlantis, the antediluvian world. He talks about all this stuff. The whole ideas of the beautiful garden, and there was a universal religion. Actually, it was pretty close to what we call Judaism nowadays. Actually, Judaism was actually a universal religion at one time, according to Donnelly, but it was Phoenicianism, to be more correctly named. But the only difference between the Jews and other religions today is that the Jews maintain the original religion. All the other ones have been kind of modified and, well, you could say upgraded, I guess. But that was actually the universal faith at one time. It was practiced, the entire world practiced it at one time. Not exactly as it is today, but fairly close in a number of ways. Pretty interesting stuff. And the
Well,
whole idea of
religion
the
in a way,
Elysian fields.
is universal just on its own because the fact that people believe there's some higher being. So that almost links all religions together. Can they
Yeah.
don't think that they always think there's a higher being, there's a higher workings going on. Okay, and that's what links all religion. Okay, whether it's Jehovah, whether it's our God, the Christian God, Allah, whoever it is, they believe it's all, or Hindu, Buddhism, whatever it is, there's always this higher thing happening. So in a way, it's still universal. It's just it's just got its own different flavors, I suppose, regionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and the whole idea, Donnelly was saying the plain of Atlantis. That goes back to when you read the Tolkien stuff. They talk about like the Numenorians and Numenor's Atlantis. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. Don't think that really needs to be gone into in any great detail. It's pretty obvious what he's referring to there with the Numenorians and the Dunedain and all this is Atlantis. Very obviously, because he was able to read the old records. So let's move on to the next one. The Shadow of Atlantis. There is no doubt at all that the power and influence of Atlantis spread across the world from South America to Egypt. Incidentally, Bragine, this is Colonel A. Bragine, the Shadow of Atlantis writes that the myth of Atlas, a giant supporting the whole universe on his shoulders, was a symbol of the tremendous political and spiritual power of the Atlanteans. Any thoughts on that?
I would have to try to dig back into my because he is Greek, Atlantis.
Yeah, it is
No,
largely that world.
well,
Yeah,
sorry, Atlas. Sorry, no Atlantis.
yeah,
Atlas.
Atlas.
He was a Greek. He was a Greek.
Hmm.
So he was a Greek god, and I'm sure there's a story with our. Sorry, do you want to allow Streamyard to use? Nah. Sorry, Streamyard want to use memory on my phone for some reason.
Oh,
Atlas. Atlas is a Greek thing. I mean, so that's meant to be Atlantean.
hmm,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
absolutely. What was it called with that? Bragging again. This whole idea. This is another colonel who's writing this. L.A. Waddell. He was a colonel in the British Army. I'll get to his work down the road in later presentations and all that. But it's interesting how all these colonels in like the 19th century were discovering all this. It was like military guys who were actually discovering all this, not scientists. Which means like, what the fucking scientists up to that all the military guys having to work this out for them? all these colonels are traveling all over the world, 1940, So yeah, the idea that the Atlanteans were this great spiritual power who fell into decline and all this and entered this kind of moral chaos. Very interesting. Fall of Atlantis. Enoch quite obviously saw that the future of Atlantis was not a happy one. The whole Book of Enoch thing, when it comes to the Watchers and the giants and the Nephilim and all this. Atlantis had known past glories and had a wonderful history, but the future pattern was strongly set on the wrong lines. The empire of the sun had taken the left-hand path. And when I read that at first, it was in Empire of the Sun, I'm thinking, does it mean Japan? But no, that's Empire of the Rising Sun. Okay. But interesting how, again, it's a universal theme of a connection to the sun and wanting to be associated with the solar power, the sun, the source of all power. The flag of Japan is essentially the sun. Any thoughts on that?
I will. I think there was a lot of sun worship. I think that's almost like a universal worship in the sun. Civilizations have recognised that the sun gives life, and it's always been connected to life and heat and warmth. I just think that so did we for a while. We maybe worshipped the sun and the heat and the light until that cataclysm happened, and then I think we maybe gave more worship to the sea after that. Because the sun would have been, I think, the thing is with catastrophes, especially like volcanic, the sun's nothing. Like if you've got these volcanoes going off and you've got all this soot and smoke in the air, where's your sun god now? For how long? I mean, but the sea seems like it's the sea, and it's right there as well. And I don't know, man. I think they feared the sea just as much as they feared, like, they probably didn't even fear the sun god. They probably feared the sea. They were actually scared of the sea. Because you can't be scared of the sun, really. You know what I mean? Like, the sun doesn't bring you any harm at all. But the sea. So I think they've done a lot of sea worship. And I think it was actually a taboo to eat fish in Britain for a long time. Because of you're taking out the sea, you didn't want to upset the sea. Do you know what I mean? By taking out of it.
I'd never thought of that, but that's a very interesting point. A lot of people are afraid of the sea. A lot of people obviously they get seasick and they have to take tablets and things like that. The crossing from was it John O'Groats up in the north of Scotland to the Orkney Islands is closed half the time because of how violent the seas are. That crossing from the land mass from the top of very top of Scotland to the Orkney Islands, Atlantic, it's closed 50% of the time almost. I learned that a few years ago because the seas are so violent. It's unbelievable how violent the seas
and the ancients
can
also
be. Very dangerous. Yeah.
The ancients also, the ancient Scots also venerated the sea god Shawnee, who's called Shawnee because the sea provided the seaweed for their agriculture, because they didn't use manure, they used seaweed on their crops. So they would do a little sacrifice in the sea. It morphed, it transformed into just pouring beer or ale, like an offering to the sea. But I reckon back in the ancient times, they used to maybe take a selected virgin or somebody and give them the old slit and put them in the sea for return. So I think the ancient Brits were scared of the sea, and again you've got all these different sea, but Shawnee was one, right? And it's funny because Shawnee, the way it's spelt, is actually a form of John, like Johnny. Sean and John are the same. Sean is just an Irish word for John. So you've got Shawnee and you've got Johnny, and John Baptist. It's funny how John the Baptist is the whole putting your head in the water. It's still got that water connection with John. You know what I mean? There's a connection with water in John the Baptist. And Shawnee, who's John, who was a sea god, who's connected to water as well. So I think there's a big thing with water and the sea with Britain. And because of that catastrophe, because of Doggerland, I think they feared the sea. They didn't fear the sun. They worshipped the sun. They hoped for the sun to rise every day. They wished for the sun to rise every day. They didn't wish for the sea to a tsunami. because I think there has been a massive tsunami hit Britain as well, and gradually it's where it
Yeah.
kind of.
I think this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, on you go. On you go.
I was going to say, in 1,000 years, Britain, as we know, it's not going to exist. It's going to be gone. It will not exist. There was a village in the middle of Scotland about a week ago that had to be evacuated because of all the floods. This island is Shetlands are going down 2 millimeters a year. This island, as we know it today, will not exist in 1,000 years. I'm telling you, it'll be gone, or it will not exist as we know it now. And Britain is on the way out. It really is, in every sense of the word, but especially geologically. We're not going to be around in 1,000 years. You can
Head
forget
for
it.
the
Britain's going to be
hills.
gone.
Head for the hills.
And for the get up to the Highlands. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you saying?
No. I was just saying before that, like, and we would have worshipped the sea, and I think water was a big part. And all these hills that you find, these
Yeah.
hill forts, kind of nowadays it's just like farmland around these hill forts, these mounds and these hills. But back in ancient times, man, you probably had to take a boat, kind to get to hill to hill to hill. These little hills everywhere were probably little villages with water everywhere. Nowadays it's marshland, but you can tell there's been a lot of water in the area, and it was maybe 1,000 years ago or something like that. That was fucking surrounded in water. You know what I mean? Maybe no like the sea.
Well,
Okay, we're not talking about sea. We're not talking about seawater here, but we're talking about real flooding everywhere. To the
when you
point
go on
where
the
there
M9
was.
down to, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there would have been flooding everywhere to the point to do the agricultural on the hills rather than flatland. All flat. Okay, most flatland was flooded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right,
I was
sorry,
going
what
to
were you
say, when
saying
you
on
go on
the
the
M?
M9, on the M9, on your way down to Falkirk and Stirling, you pass by the Kelpies. And if you actually read that story, the story of the Kelpies, that is a fucking scary fucking story. These the sea goddess type monster type thing, which can appear like a beautiful woman and lures people into their deaths and all this sort of thing. And like it's almost like the sirens out of the Odyssey. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
story essentially. So these Greek myths and these Scottish monsters, they all have kind of like the same origins. I think I'm thinking the same thing. But yeah, you get the universal stories that all kind of add to the same thing. The thing that's surprising, I think I said this before, it's not how different these stories are, but how much they're exactly the same. You just change the names a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, or even just change the syllables or the vowels, and it's the same fucking story. It really is. There's no differences. It's all over the world. Anyway, the Great Deluge, it resulted in such disruptions of atmospheric conditions as to change the entire climate of the globe, creating the present conditions of thin atmosphere and extensive desert regions. This catastrophic result has come down to various remnants of mankind, much mixed with later tragedies as the story of the Great Deluge. Every civilized culture on Earth has its own version of the same tradition. Like I was saying, same story all over the world. It really is the same story, no difference. But anyway, what do you think? This is exactly what you were saying. This is the universal flood, the fear of water, the
Mm-hmm.
fear of the floods. Yeah,
Yep.
it really is. Okay, well, we'll just move on to the next one then, because we've pretty much covered that. The Atlantic continent, the Noah story has been brought down in time and made to refer to Atlantis because the two events were similar in certain respects. They brought with them from Mars the original story as a part of their native and traditional culture, but their descendants referred it to the country of their immediate ancestors, having lost the original reference during a period of semi-barbarism and reconstruction following the Atlantean cataclysm. So the idea being, actually, this race that came from Mars completely forgot that they were from Mars and just thought that it happened all here to begin with.
Well, it's like any tribe, I suppose. If they're a sort of nomadic tribe, I'm sure after 1,000 years they wouldn't remember where they originally came from, to begin with. What I think's interesting is that picture of the map. See on your last
Yeah.
slide. Put the slide up.
Yeah.
Right. So you're probably trying to focus on the middle island that they're saying
Yeah.
is that Is that Atlantis?
Yep.
So how?
I think that's what it
I'm
says.
trying to figure. I'm trying to figure out where it's supposed to be because we've got America at the right hand side and we've got Africa on the left.
Hmm.
So where would that place Atlantis?
Right in the middle, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge,
No,
being
man,
right in the.
because on the west side of America, you've got Japan. Okay, you've got Hawaii. Like you obviously come across Hawaii, and then you've got Japan, and you've got like the east. Like Africa wouldn't be there. Like that map is just total bullshit. Like think about it. Think about where America and Africa is on that map. Even if you turned it upside down, like it doesn't. Like what the fuck is that? Like
Hmm.
then again, how can America be on the right hand side and Africa be on the left? Where Africa is, that's meant to be like China, well, Japan and China and the east.
Hmm.
Um, and so obviously the Bering Strait and all that joins and all that
Oh,
joins up.
hang on. Lost you there for a
Like that
second.
map
Yeah.
doesn't even fucking make that map. It's bar the fact it's got like an unknown it's meant to be Atlantis. Like the other continents aren't even in the right places. Like what the fuck's going on there? Like who drawn that map? Stevie Wonder.
Well, Atlantis wouldn't be the thing I would be concerned about anyway. I would be focused more on Lemuria, from what I've learned. Which again, when we get into future presentations, Lemuria is the one that you really need to focus on, not Atlantis, because Lemuria actually came first, and Lemuria was right in the middle between like India and Australia and Africa. It was a much I can't talk today, much larger landmass than Atlantis was, and it was a lot more influential. It's almost like Atlantis came after Lemuria. Lemuria is the one that really you'd focus on, and I would say, but based upon what I've read, because it was a much larger continent than Atlantis was, so Lemuria is really the one that should be kind of like the focus. But anyway, but I get what you mean, though. It is kind of weird how it's just kind of in the middle there, and you have this geological fault between the United States and the North American landmass and Africa and Europe, and it's really turbulent right in the middle of that ocean. The Mid
Well,
Atlantic
Africa would
range.
be and Africa would be below you.
Oh, hang on, I've lost them. Sorry, what were you saying?
The
Hello?
map's wrong, man. Map's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, this seems to be a wee bit off. But then again, it's probably a few centuries old, so I explain it anyway. Cataclysm. This grafting is further complicated by the circumstances that the Atlantic continent went down in a series of cataclysms. Not just one. This was a string of disasters, terminating with the sinking of the last major island 11,000 years ago. The main part of the continent went down 25,000 years ago. So this happened over a period of time, a long period of time. What caused Atlantis to go wrong? It could be that two factions arose: those who wished to maintain the earlier Edenic agricultural civilization, and those who thought the way of progress lay towards the development of technology and general elevation of the people. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds like the Reformation. This sounds like the difference between the Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. Almost like this is, or that event was like an echo of this one, where you've got like because I might be a little bit rusty here, but as far as I can remember, the Catholic segments of Europe wanted to maintain an agricultural lifestyle, whereas the Protestant segments wanted to invest in industry and capitalism and economics. I don't know. I'm going off memory on that one, but what do you think?
Well, is it a natural disaster or is it something because they done something economically or culturally wrong? Is that what it's implying? Like at the end of it, they've done something wrong for this to happen, or is it just a natural disaster? Kind of, is it God punishing them, or what is this? Like, is it? See, what caused Atlantis to go wrong? It could be that
Yeah.
two factions arose. Those who wish to maintain the earlier goal of an Edenic agri. And what does that mean? How did that cause the Great Deluge? That if one faction chose to do the Edenic agriculture, I don't understand that. So this happened because a certain people chose to do a certain thing.
Hmm.
Is that what it's
That's an
implying here?
interesting. That's a very interesting point, isn't it? Because just on the surface of it, doesn't really quite add up, does it? Because one group wants to go back to the farm and pick up the plows and the hoes and till the land. Another one's like, no, let's all get our smartphones out and go on to X. But I know it's kind of odd, isn't it? But I think that goes back to what was said earlier about Lemuria and Atlantis. They were in conflict with each other, and Trench here is not really doing a fantastic job of putting that forward, and maybe I've just edited it rather poorly. That was the first presentation I did after all, so I cut an awful lot out. In this case, maybe I cut a bit too much out. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of bizarre. Like there was obviously this conflict within that society of Atlantis. One half wanted to go back to or maintain the old way of the garden. Another one wanted to advance with technology. And later on, in later presentations, it talks about the obsession with technology with Atlantis. That were all obsessed with the future technology and their robots and the machines and all this, and that ran concurrently with the rise of depravity and debauchery went hand in hand with the rise of technology. So like porn on the internet, like today almost, like when technology advances but spirituality declines, this is the outcome is catastrophe. And it's an interesting that it's a series of disasters. It's not one; it didn't just go down like that. It was a series of disasters that sunk the lands. You have to wonder, is this tie into what it's saying in the Old Testament and the Bible about the wrath of God when the people go astray and all this, when God's people or Jehovah's people, I guess in this case with the Old Testament, they all go astray and then the lands get destroyed and they just meet with disasters when they disobey. It's interesting, isn't it? This whole kind of theological tie-in with all these disasters. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
I just next slide.
Sure. Yeah, we're getting close to the end now. Torrents of
I
Atlantis.
I, I,
And
I gave you my thoughts on it.
sorry,
I asked you what was it. I was actually already gave you a little bit my thought for that last one, but I think you
sure.
forgot. You went in a little diatribe and forgot, but I already
Oh,
told you
sorry
what I
about
thought about the last slide there. Ah, that's all right, man.
that. Okay.
I was
So,
just, I was just, I
Torrents
was
of
just
Atlantis.
asking. I was just wondering if it was a natural thing, and if this natural disaster happened, or is it Jehovah that we're speaking about like before, or can what
Yeah,
caused the deluge, or because there was two factions, and one faction chose to go to
sure.
Edenic. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
cool. Right.
actually, sorry, it goes to the whole thing with Moses. One lot wanted to go with the age of the ram, another one the age of the bull. That's also maybe a tie-in as well. Anyway, I know it's getting late, so we'll wrap this up. Torrents of Atlantis.
Oh, it's like
In time,
Elijah.
this
Is that Elijah on
yeah,
the mountain with like
Elijah.
Elijah that he he says my God will create this fire. That he has
Yeah,
this like fucking magic. What one's practicing fucking the pagan beliefs, and Elijah's practicing like the Abrahamic, and he says, "I'll make my,
yeah,
I'll create a fire or some shit like that." It's like two
yeah. On Mount, yeah,
two things.
yeah, on Mount Carmel. I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
from the Bible. That was the priests of uh, the priests of Baal,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
other one was God. I remember. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly right. That was on Mount Carmel in Haifa. Yeah. Exactly. I've been there before, by the way. Anyway, Torrents of Atlantis. In time, this difference may have led to bloodshed. The two factions probably found themselves engaged in a full-scale struggle for domination of the planet. So this is the Atlantean-Lemurian War. Is what it's referring to here. As a result of the forces employed in this great war, much of the moisture in the suspension in the atmosphere of Earth fell down in torrents. So the idea being, I guess, that these kind of, it's not really stated or even really implied here, but the idea being that this was an intercontinental war. They were using these lethal weapons which were fucking up the ionosphere, basically, and all the water came down as a result. I was working on that today. I was working on part 6 and part 8, and I actually managed to finish them today. And it was talking about that. Like, there was this water vapor that surrounded the planet, and it was
what it's called,
destroyed
mate?
by the war.
Do you know what it's called? It's called rain. It's called rain. And the water vapor's clouds, mate. It's no any technology or any shit like that, man. It's no any sci-fi technology. It's called rain. That water that fell down from the sky. That it's rain.
Yeah. It's something a lot of it in Scotland. It has to be said. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to it here. But this idea that there was a 40 days, the 40 nights of rain, and all this sort of thing. There's all different theories about that, by the way. And this will be getting into when we get into the later parts. But there's different theories about that, by the way, believe it or not. There is the theory that the planet between Mars and Jupiter was a water planet, and when it was destroyed, all the rain from that fell down into the Earth. There's another theory even that the planet Saturn, when it was decimated by the advent of Jupiter coming in, that created a lot of rain somehow. But there's different theories about the Great Flood. There's loads of them, but we'll get into all that in the future. Unless you have anything else to add.
I didn't think there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter.
Yeah. There's different names for it. One of the names was Lucifer. Another one was Tiamat or Man.
Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's an extra one in there or something?
Well, not anymore, but there was back then. Yeah, and there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter, and it was destroyed. There's different theories about that. There was the theory that it blew up. There was the theory that it was destroyed by an outside force. Again, we'll get into all that in the future. But that was the source of the asteroid belts.
Jupiter does have moons. Jupiter has moons, man, and the moons are pretty big. So maybe they'll get mixed up with moons.
Well, David Icke speculates that actually Jupiter and Mars are not planets, but they're actually sub-brown dwarf stars. So they're like mini suns, and all the planets around them are like mini solar systems on a much smaller scale, but albeit. But there's a whole idea of the sub-brown dwarf star. Actually, either of those planets are too small to be sub-brown dwarf stars, but they're kind of like a smaller version of it, kind of. But that's maybe subject for another time. So pole shifts, the climate of the whole planet was drastically changed. The long winter set in and the poles shifted. Great quantities of ice formed around the new poles almost overnight, and tremendous storms raged across the world for years. Other religions and races have their own Noahs which tell similar stories. Have you ever read the Epic of the Gilgamesh, the old Sumerian myth?
I think I've heard it before.
That is a very interesting story. I read it years ago, and the Noah myth is largely based on that. You would see exactly how it ties in.
Right.
Oh, camera's killed off. All right, you just
I'm
waiting for me to wrap this up.
No, I'm still here. I'm just doing something, man.
All right, no bother. But it's true that all the religions have their own versions of the Noah story, not just the Abrahamic ones. Like the Epic of the Gilgamesh is certainly a very, very good example. And the whole idea that the climate changed overnight. If you look into like the electric universe theory with Troy McLaughlin and all this sort of thing, the Earth used to be like this paradise all around, and the original planet the original sun, I should say, for the planet Earth was actually Saturn. And during that time, during the Purple Dawn era, the Earth was like just a total garden. Everything was very luxurious and very laid back, and the gravity was a lot different, which explains the dinosaurs. How they're so different from modern animals, modern creations, all this sort of thing. Pretty interesting stuff. Any thoughts on the idea of a pole shift? Because according to one of the later slides, I think I was working on it today, that the poles have shifted over 100 times in the last 10,000 years, 171 times, I think it was. So the poles are actually shifting fairly constantly. So the whole idea that this is something to be afraid of is kind of ridiculous because it's happened so often. But any thoughts on that, like the change in the climate of the planet and all this sort of thing?
Well, the poles there's a couple of poles. You've got the magnetic pole, I think,
Yeah.
where things are pulled magnetically, and you've got the pole, like the North Pole, the pole they've got stuck in the
Yeah.
ground.
Where you dry your laundry.
But I've heard this stuff about the pole changes over the years. I don't know, man. I don't know if it's happened within our human history before, and what effect would it have on the Earth if it did happen? Like, I don't know. I've had a lot of scientific speculation about what would happen. Like, there'd be tsunamis and things like that, but I'm not sure, man. Maybe it has happened. I'm not saying that it's not. It could have happened, man, in the past.
Well, the thing is, all these scientists, they'll always have all these ideas and all these theories, and they tend to go big or go home type of thing. There's all tends to be a very, very dramatic stuff. Like in the 1970s, we were going to run out of oil, right? During the Carter administration or whatever it was. Well, guess what? It's fucking 50 years later and we're still here. It never fucking happened. Boo hoo. But there's always these theories, oh, we're going to run out of this. It's all fear mongering. We're going to run out of this. Or this is going to happen. And guess what usually happens? Fucking nothing. That is the most common outcome, is that actually nothing happens. But,
It's the same with the CME, Kevin. It's the same with this coronal mass ejections and shit flying at the sun and vaporizing the fucking earth, and we'll be back to the Stone Age and fucking. It's like you said there, Blair. You hear these things by scientists predicting this, predicting that, but will it ever happen? You know what I mean? Is it just fear mongering, or I don't know? Do they want extra money to study it? Oh, we need money to study the CMEs.
This is what it is. It's all money. It's all resources. It's all about keep funding me. It's like the movie with Michael Douglas. What's it called? Falling Down, where he goes up to the guys who are working on the road and he says, "What's wrong with the road? What's wrong with the street?" And he gives them he's like, "Oh, I don't know," and all. And he's like, "I want you to admit there's nothing wrong with the street," and he literally has to point the fucking gun at him before he admits it. Yeah. But everything's a racket, really, isn't it?
That's a good movie, that Falling Down.
It's a brilliant movie. I love that movie. So the story of Atlantis. I do not ask you to believe the sole survivors of Atlantis were floating about in raging torrents in a wooden ship for 40 days and 40 nights. W. Scott Elliott goes so far as to describe Atlantean airboats. So the Atlanteans of 25,000 years ago were what we should call a white race. The nearest relatives are Basques, the Berbers of North Africa, the Celts, the Scottish Highlands, Ireland, Wales, and parts of north of France, and a few Indians of both Americas. So there we go, my friend. We're both Atlanteans. What's your thoughts on that?
That's why people want to believe that shit, man, so they feel special. I'm an Atlantean, man.
That's true, yeah.
It makes you feel like you're some kind of superior race, I suppose. And I suppose that's like super superior, because you think you're like even more superior than white people as well. Some white people, I don't know, again, mixed race people. Who knows? Yeah. What makes you pure Aryan? Like, what makes you part of this race? You need blue eyes, because if you need blue eyes, I'm fucked, man.
Well, I don't have blue eyes either.
Well, we're no part of the chosen race then.
Yeah, but the thing is, actually, if you're really actually paying attention, the Atlanteans were a bunch of fuck ups. So being an Atlantean is not necessarily a good thing because we lost our continent and we ended up as refugees in someone else's
Hey, it
country. So
wasn't their
actually,
fault,
being an
man.
Atlantean
It was natural disasters,
might not be
man,
all
that
it's
caused
cracked up
that
to be.
shit. They weren't
Yeah,
fuck ups,
it might
man.
not.
It was a natural disaster. Someone never went, "You were bad boys because you chose this faction." Ah! I just
Mm,
think fucking there probably was a civilization, and they were probably
yeah,
quite advanced. Again, I'm not saying
yeah,
advanced like where they've got rockets or spaceships or anything, but they're probably pretty advanced. And I'm not saying that some giant catastrophe could have like restarted humanity again. That's plausible, very plausible.
yeah,
Um, but all these ideas that again we've came from Mars and fucking, I don't know, mate. It's just I think even just speculating that there was a civilization before us that could have been advanced is wacky enough without saying that they came from
mm,
Mars. Get what I mean? Um, I think you need to start with the basics before you get to like to thinking that these people came from spaceships and other planets and things like that. Maybe there
yeah,
was a pure kind of race or some kind of superior race that maybe started all the races.
mm,
Um, there's so many things you could speculate without bringing Mars and other things into it, and it will still be pretty wacky. I think the fact that
yeah,
I think the fact that science says right that all Europeans have got at least 4% Neanderthal DNA, right? So to me, science has just said that we are not full humans; we're hybrid humans because Neanderthals weren't
yeah,
human. They weren't Homo sapien. They were a different version. They were another form of human, but they weren't humans. They were a different form. And sub-Saharan Africans haven't got that they haven't got that gene. So
mhm,
again, already we're like a hybrid race. Without
yeah,
alien, that's without the aliens. We're a hybrid kind of race. And in a way, if you think about race theory and look at dogs and certain animals, if you keep interbreeding them, they start getting diseases, they start getting mutations, whatever. But the fact that we bred with a Neanderthal, we seem to have got good elements for both sides. Because Neanderthals apparently were quite smart, kind of like they're
yeah,
according to the science. You know what I mean? So maybe this is where we, as a white race, get our advantages from, like these past
mhm,
Neanderthals that we interbred with, that other races never bred with because they were at different parts of the world. Because I think the Asians, I think it was is it the Deniscians? They were like a
not
form of
sure.
Neanderthal, but they were smaller and stuff like that. I think the Asians have got, or even the Arab people have got some of that. But white Europeans are meant to have Neanderthal genetics, some more than others.
Yeah.
So to me, even
Well,
that makes us like
according
not a
to
full human.
sure, yeah. I was just going to say, according to Lou Baldwin, when we get to 4.5, he actually claims that the Neanderthals were the Martians. So this is kind of almost backing up what Breslau Lapartrange was saying about the Europeans or the white race being of Mars. Well, maybe not completely, but maybe if like the Neanderthals that came here were actually
I know, but
Martian,
what? Not
maybe they were the ones who
once
came
did
here.
they mention Neanderthal. Not once did they mention cave people, Neanderthal, another form of human.
Well, in that
And
person, well,
we
I cut a lot out to make that. Sorry, go ahead.
the way he's speaking, we are the aliens. You know what I mean, he never said that there was Neanderthals that were aliens. And maybe
Mm,
that's who the Nephilim were, in the Bible. Okay, maybe
yeah,
because although we're bigger nowadays, back then the modern humans were probably smaller than the Neanderthals.
probably. Yeah. I mean, in medieval times, we were only like 5'6", 5'7", if you look at the doors of like the old church buildings and all this sort of thing. I'll tell you what, it's worth taking a look at all the churches around here in West Lothian. So many of them are Anglo-Norman by design. You know, look at the old designs of the buildings. But I don't know why I'm getting off on that. I'm maybe a bit sidetracked there, but it is pretty interesting. All the mixture of the mitochondrial DNA and all the rest of it. You know, the whole thing with the Neanderthals and Bigfoot, and it all ties into on our subjects as well. I don't know if you know much about it. Missing 411, the people who go missing in national parks near boulder fields, and how that all ties in with fairies and Irish and Nordic and Icelandic myths and things like that. Do you know
Aye, or
Binny Craig
there's a
just
lot
up the
of
road there?
aye,
Yeah,
aye,
yeah, that's known as the Hill of the Fairies, Binny Craig,
yep,
just up there. And see, when you
yep,
actually, I don't know, last time you've been up there, but see, next time you go up Binny Craig, look at the two branches, the way they arch like that. It almost looks like you're walking through a portal when you go up there. But anyway, sorry,
uh-huh.
go ahead.
There's a mausoleum actually in that hill.
Is there?
Yep, but you can't. It's hidden within the vegetation, within the those. See those really spiny bushes, the yellow flowers that
Aye.
they've totally taken over. But there's actually a mausoleum. I think the guy he owned the land and he wanted buried in the hill, in that
Mhm.
in that hill. Next time you're on your computer, research the mausoleum at that hill. There's
Interesting.
photographs of it, but it's nowadays you can hardly get to it because it's so much vegetation around it.
Never knew about that. Fascinating.
Aye,
Cool.
because it's the name Binny. I'm sure the lands owned were owned by a Binny, a guy called Binny. But that's not who was buried in the mausoleum. I think it was a different name. I think he got the land off the Binnies.
Mm,
But aye, anyway.
interesting. Cool. Well, I'm really gonna have to go because I'm about to wet myself. I'm absolutely bursting for the toilet.
Same
But
here, mate.
listen,
I
thanks very
didn't want
much
to
for.
be rude and just leave.
Yeah, no bother. No bother. Well, listen, thanks very much for joining me, mate. I've really enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Right, no problem. Cheers, mate. See you later.
Cheers, mate. Cheers. Bye bye.